i priliku i čast da ugostimo profesora, rektora Univerziteta Američko-Grčkog u Atini, Đorđa Hagertija. On će govoriti o perspektivama razvoja visokog obrazovanja u svijetu do 2020. godine. Nadam se da ćete uživati predavanje, potom imate priliku da postavljate pitanje. Pristajte, Đorđe.
I would first like to thank the rector for inviting me to the university. Part of the vision that I will share with you is what the future of higher education is going to be on a global scale. I don't pretend that I have a crystal ball, but I do have some experience in this field, and I do have some ambitions for global education. And it's wonderful to know that the rector shares that vision and is taking a leadership to look at the prospects, the possibilities of international education. I am here with you today because of something that happened 7 years ago. Dr. Pavic and Darko Minic, Dr. Pavic's leadership in trying to start international programming was very inspirational to me here in Belgrade, and I met him 7 years ago. And I was the president of Franklin Pierce University for 14 years in the United States, and we had a magnificent student named Darko Minic. And Darko not only was a magnificent student, he was our best tennis player. And he was extremely popular. I was telling Dr. Pavic, he was not only extremely popular and viewed as a very good student, but he was a magnificent ambassador for Serbia in the United States, because most American students have never had access to a global audience, and certainly Darko represented your country magnificently at Franklin Pierce and beyond. Let me tell you what I'm going to try to accomplish here and just give a bit of an introduction. I have basically 4 objectives here. The first one is to scan the policy environment as it exists today globally. The second is to review the general modes of instructional and institutional collaboration, because that is really going to be the theme of what I'm going to speak about. The third is to offer personal perspectives born of experience and available policy research. And the fourth item, which is the most dangerous, is I will opine, I will give opinions as to what I think the future holds through the year 2020. Let me also tell you that I see my role here as having 3 parts. The first one is to speak to you and to give a presentation of 20 or 30 minutes and to try to frame a dialogue and a discussion. And then to have the second part of this morning as a dialogue, a discussion, an opportunity for questions and answers, to explore some of the things I'm going to say, because I have a couple of controversial things to say. They certainly are controversial in the United States, and they're probably fairly controversial globally, but I do believe it. And the last thing that is going to be accomplished is something that I hope to happen this afternoon, and that is to take the possibilities of partnership, global partnership with this university, and to discuss this and hopefully to sign a memorandum of understanding, which I've been authorized to sign on behalf of the trustees of Hellenic American University. So those are the three items. Now, what is my background? And this is, let me be somewhat personal. I am an example of the transforming power of higher education. I was born south of Boston to an Irish-American family, lower-class Irish-American family, in what we call a village, a small town. And I grew up in a very, very good family, but in a tough town, what we call in the United States a tough town. It was a blue-collar town. And I had some teachers who said, you know, you have some intelligence and you should try to go to college. And so I ended up going to a small, private, liberal arts college, Stonehill College, and worked very hard. It was a Catholic, Roman Catholic institution. And the priest took a liking to me. They thought I was going to become a priest, which I was not interested in, but I ended up going on to graduate school at Harvard University. So I went from a blue-collar experience, which was not educationally grounded, to a magnificent institution of higher learning, and I knew this was something special. And my career has been a result of having the opportunity to have this higher education experience both at the undergraduate level and at the graduate level. When I go back to the town that I came from, there aren't a lot of people who dress up in suits. Most of the people that I graduated with live day to day. They're good people, they're proud people. But as a result of my education, the world has been open to me. And so I am the product of, and I am an example of the power of higher education. I spent 8 years in government. Immediately upon leaving the doctoral program at Harvard, I went into the government. I had a postdoctoral fellowship, worked for the government, ended up as chief of compliance and enforcement, which was the policeman for the U.S. Department of Education, making sure that all the states were in compliance with federal law. I then went on to teach at my two alma maters. I taught government at Stonehill College, and I taught education policy and education finance at Harvard University. I started a company in Washington, D.C., which did consulting work. So I had government and higher education and business, and then at the age of 41, for some reason, I decided I wanted to become a college president. So I competed for that, and very early on in my career, at the age of 41, I became the president of a university. At the time it was a college, we grew it to a university. And I was given the opportunity to become a national leader in higher education. I ended up as chairman of the National Association of Independent Colleges and Universities in Washington, D.C. during my time as president of 9 years. I was chairman of the Post-Secondary Education Commission. But I always remembered where I came from, and I always remembered what higher education did for me, because mine's an amazing story, and your story can be an amazing story also, to the power of higher education. So I believe in higher education. I believe that it's an enterprise that's a noble enterprise, and I believe it's something that will define the future of the globe. And I don't think I'm embellishing this. So let me go through my presentation a little bit. Let me try to scan the pulse about. Let me tell you one other thing about me. You've seen me look hard at things. For the last 15 years, I've been living I cannot see. And so you're all kind of a shadow to me. And so I'm going to ask Darko, when we do the question and answer period, for him to help me in identifying people who may raise their hands. This is something that is something I live with, but it's just kind of an inconvenience for me. But you'll see me look hard at things that I'm trying to read, and I apologize. We scan the policy environment. Higher education for the last century has not changed. And I don't believe it's going to change in the next 20 years. The fundamental mission of higher education is teaching, number one, research, and service. So we need to start out with that fundamental, teaching, research, and service. By technology, interinstitutional collaboration, and global learning communities, the marketplace for higher education is robust and constantly evolving. That's absolutely a plus, because new knowledge comes about, we try to disseminate it. We create it, we disseminate it. It's got to be a robust system. And as you will learn, I believe it needs to be a robust system without borders. Place-based modes of instruction are being supplemented and in some cases supplanted by e-learning, by online education. I have that as both a plus and a minus. E-learning is absolutely vital to the future of higher education, but it is not a replacement for traditional modes of education. The ways that we communicate, person to person, teacher to student, it can't be a total replacement. And if you look at the research that's done in the United States that's come out over the last year, the research says clearly the most effective learning strategy for competency acquisition in higher education is not traditional alone, not traditional classroom, it's not online alone, it's hybrid. In hybrid, I mean mixing traditional education, classroom teaching, with online education, using the strengths of both to create a learning environment and a learning system by which we can learn best. The vast majority of us can learn best. So it's a hybrid. The research is very clear on this in the United States. Certainly over the last year, I want to say 18 months, that's come up. There's a significant negative, certainly in the United States, but I see it happening in the European Union. And that is the cost escalation of higher education. I give great credit to this university for being founded in the last 20 years, because these are highly labor-intensive enterprises. These are highly technology-driven enterprises. Those two things make us extremely costly as a business. Extremely costly as a business. The reality is that the cost of higher education is spiraling up. When I went to, I'll give you an example. When I went to Franklin Pierce University, the cost for tuition, room, board, fees was $19,000. That was $1995. Today, it's over $38,000. Less than 2% of the American people, American families, can afford that education. And so we're forced to provide as much scholarship assistance as we can, but we still can't cover what is the actual cost for a student and their families to attend Franklin Pierce University. And I'm seeing it in the European Union, now that I'm at Hellenic American University as a provost. I'm seeing what's happened with systems that were fundamentally free, public systems that were fundamentally free, and now students and their families are being asked to pay for at least a portion of these services. These are costs that we're not expecting 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, for families and for students. And their expectations that were never seen 10 years ago on families and students. with the next bullet on the transfer of cost to students. But let me just tell you one other feature of the difficulties that are being faced both in the United States and Europe. Before the major recessions that have hit the United States and Europe, certainly in the United States and a bit in Europe, students received grants to go to college or to university. What's happened now is that those grants are being replaced by loans. So students are going out so that they can have their undergraduate and graduate education, and they're taking loans at 5, 6, 7, 8%. So when they leave school, they have a debt burden. They have to pay back the loans, which in the past they didn't have to pay back because they were grants. Some students are leaving the United States institutions with loan obligations, debt obligations, when they walk out of having an undergraduate degree of 20 to 30,000 euros, 20 to 30,000 euros. How do they start a life with this kind of burden? These are public policy issues that are extremely difficult in both the United States and increasingly in Europe. I have had the privilege of setting up international programs, international collaborations with universities around the world. A month and a half ago, I was in Vietnam, which is a remarkable country. The advances, the economic advances, and the ambition of this country absolutely shocked me. And their focus on education, and particularly American-based education, was striking to me. But I've had the opportunity to go to European countries, Asian countries, South American countries, to establish relationships, not only for Franklin Pierce University, but for other universities that I represented in the United States. And there are some negatives that I see in the current policy environment. And I'd like to talk about three of them. You're going to understand when I get done that I really do believe that cooperation between universities around the globe is the only way for us to advance in higher education. Whether it's 2020 or 2050 or 2100, we're too expensive now. We're becoming too expensive for people to have access, regular access to higher education. So I see cooperation as both cost beneficial and also a better way to deliver educational services. But I'd like to talk about three impediments that I see, and they're in the public policy environment. Let's take the United States. The United States is the #1 importer of international students. For a while, Australia actually was ahead of the United States. That's the #1 importer of international students. It's not even close on exporting educational programs, but importing. When you have to deal with the United States, and you have to deal with regulators and accreditors, you're dealing with pretty much 50 different countries. Because every state has its own requirements for higher education. Because the federal government, we don't have a Ministry of Education. The federal government delegates to the states all of the authority overseeing higher education for both public institutions and private institutions. So whether you are Harvard or you are the University of New Hampshire, a public institution, you need to meet state requirements which are set by the Post-Secondary Commission of that particular state. When you try to go out and collaborate with another state or with another country, you run into significant hurdles of trying to meet those requirements and match it with the requirements of the country you're working with or even another state. Second, the accreditation system is not keeping pace with the advances in higher education. I'm absolutely certain you're using technology day in and day out for your learning here. We belong to the New England Association of Schools and Colleges, which is the oldest accrediting body in the world. It covers Harvard, it covers all the Ivy League schools in New England. It's well established, it's well respected. But they are 15 to 20 years behind in their standards for accreditation in where education is. They're blocking certain advances in higher education, particularly technology-based advances, which can help us become more cost-effective, more global, and trying to work with these accrediting agencies, these accrediting bodies, is one of the most frustrating things that you can imagine, because we know where higher education is going, and we know how fast we have to move forward. But what we're seeing is the accreditors not changing the standards until they are sure that these activities promote quality. Right now I am responsible for attempting to establish and to grow an American university which is approved in the state of New Hampshire, a candidate for accreditation by the New England Association of Schools and Colleges accreditor. We are an American university. And our campus is in Athens, Greece. We have had enormous difficulties with the provisions of the Greek government and the authority. Who has the authority for an American university in Greece? The Greeks say they do, and I can understand that. But beyond the Greeks having that authority, we have to meet American standards. And you'll see that in the future, we have got to establish some understanding between countries for what are the fundamental standards for quality, what are the fundamental standards for governance that must be maintained so that we don't keep getting blocked by government regulation, by accreditation, and by a problem that's a European problem. The Bologna Accords were far-reaching, far-seeing, had a great objective: standardized systems. Standardized systems for quality, standardized systems for credits, standardized systems for degrees. What's happening within the Bologna framework right now? We have countries that are saying, that might be nice. I know we signed it, but we're going to do it our way. Because they're under political pressure. I can use Greece as an example. Greece refuses, because of the politics involved with the higher education community, to actually abide by the Bologna Accords, which they signed years ago. And this is happening across other European countries. So where in the United States, we are wedded to love rules. We're wedded to rules and provisions, obligations. The opposite is happening right now within the European Union, as I understand it. People are saying, we know that the rule exists, we're choosing to do it this way, and sooner or later we'll get to it. You can't have a system like that. So higher education is stuck between over-regulation and ignoring regulations. And that's the policy environment that I find us in. The final piece is, I've establish international programs. And every single place that I've gone has what I would consider protectionist policies. They're trying to protect the system that they have, which gets in the way of true collaboration, true cooperation. The United States has its system. The European nations have their system. South American countries have their system. Chile, which is fairly entrepreneurial, still has a very well-established higher education hierarchy and structure. How to overcome that is enormous. Let me just spend 1 minute and talk about the general of instructional delivery and institutional collaboration. Again, you're going to find that I believe in cooperative work, because I think it's the only thing that's going to save us as a high-quality, functioning system. But there are 4 modes of delivery. The traditional classroom, lecture, like I'm doing here right now, and something that you probably have another name for it, but in the United States we call it service learning, which is experiential learning. It's actually doing, learning by doing, and that's usually done out in the community. And then we have e-learning, the e-learning platforms, online platforms. And then we have the hybrid system, which is integrating online learning with traditional classroom experience, and sometimes experiential, all in one. So that's the base we have for collaboration as higher education institutions. And then the modes of interinstitutional collaboration. And very honestly, I think I've been involved in all of these. There are faculty exchanges, there are student exchanges, there are cooperative research opportunities between individuals, teachers, scholars, professors, or departments within universities. There's the establishment of institutes, which involve a number of universities, and they establish one institute. It can be discipline-based or institutional-based. And then finally, probably the most difficult thing to do, which I understand you're doing with Lincoln University right now, which is pretty far-sighted. It's either dual degree or joint degree programs, so either dual degrees or joint degrees. And that requires a lot of detailed work and a lot of negotiation. I can go through my personal perspectives and what the research tells us, because I've kind of covered some of these things in my prior remarks. But like, here are a couple of controversial things that I do believe. I believe that, as in the United States and now in Europe, there is a bubble. I believe there was in banking and housing and healthcare. There's a higher education bubble which can burst. It will happen first in the United States, and it will then happen in Europe. Probably won't happen in places like China or Southeast Asia, maybe not even in India, because they're still developing their system. But remember, our systems are tied to old models. An institution like this has great advantages because you understand you're in the business of education. Old systems have infrastructures and have traditions and have a lot of things that slow them down and weigh them down and become quite costly. But in the United States, for only 2% of the population can pay for a private college or university education. We're going to have, something's going to give. And in the European Union, where people were used to receiving their education at little And a system, because of the economies in these countries, cannot sustain these universities the way they did. We have the potential for the system eroding and possibly falling apart. In the United States, we can already see some of this happening. Private universities, which are more expensive than the public universities, are beginning to fold and merge. So they're either going out of business, they may have been in business for 100 years, or they're merging with other institutions to try to become stronger. Public institutions are now looking for ways to merge their programs with other public universities or with private universities. These are ways of trying to stem a bubble that might burst. And let's remember that a bubble that bursts has spiraling costs. It has a market saturation, and it's not seen as retaining the value of one step. Those are the three features. The only thing that we can say in the United States is that the research shows us that a bachelor's degree is worth about, in earnings, lifetime earnings, 2.5 times what a high school degree will get in lifetime earnings. It shows that if you get a master's degree, you earn 3.5 times as much as if you had a high school degree. The doctorate, not so much, but we clearly have a record showing that education has value. And the more education you have, the better, the more likely you're going to live a better life. And all the social science research, including the social science research in Europe, says college graduates are less likely to be on the social system, the social welfare system. They're less likely to be involved in crime. You go across, they're more likely to be involved in community work, volunteer work. You go across the spectrum. A college education means a great deal. And if you look at the world, and this number still exists, it's another 2%. Only 2% of the world population have a higher education degree. 2%. So I consider myself lucky to be out of that 2%, and I hope that you do also. So I do believe that there is a bubble, and I do believe unless it's well managed, it can burst. First in the United States, then in Europe. And it will be very much around the inability or cost, which deals with access, the access to higher education. The other controversial thing I will say, and it's very controversial in Greece, and I've said it and I've been booed, but the reality is the distinctions that I have found in Europe between public universities and private universities is silly. It's silly, it's ill-informed, and it can be destructive. Nobody can tell me that the quality of a private higher education is any different from a public education. As a matter of fact, I would argue that private higher education systems are far more efficient in delivering instruction than public systems. That's my observation. And again, many people disagree, but it's my observation from 30 years in this business. The cost pressures of higher education are going to require institutions, much like this institution. Remember, I see this institution as ahead of the game. Institutions to survive and to serve the public are going to have to be niche institutions. They're going to have specializations that make sense in the market, and they're going to have to be collaborative. They're going to have to be cooperative with other institutions in order to provide their services in a more efficient manner and to get instruction out to the largest number of potential students, deserving students, as possible. The next one's axiomatic. Whether I was in higher education, I would say, without the investment in education, the economies of the world, individual economies and collectively, they can't function. They can't repair themselves. We have a broken system right now. From the United States across the globe, it's a broken economic system. It's one that's not working well. 1990s, everybody believed the sky was the limit. We've learned the limits now. This cannot be repaired without highly educated individuals who not only have skills, but they have an understanding as educated people that they're part of a larger community, and they need to do the next right thing, not as large as small. Now, I would say it's 20 years I've been involved in international collaborations. And institutions that get involved, there have been many, many mistakes made, and I made some. And I had to learn, but I made some. I'm the first to tell you, I bury my dead. I try not to talk about my mistakes, but I've made a number of mistakes as the president of a university which desperately wanted to have international programs. But there are three things that boards of trustees and presidents and faculty, the entire community have to think about. Why are we doing this? Why are we entering into an international program? Or why are we getting involved in a cooperative effort? And you have to ask yourself this on three different levels. And many times, this is the ultimate thing that gets confused, and this is the ultimate thing that makes these systems apart. The first one is, never get involved with another institution unless it serves your mission. You have a distinct mission. Your mission is in a mission statement. Many times, and I was guilty of it, I would be attracted to a magnificent university in Austria, for instance, that had nothing to do with my mission. But I wanted to have a relationship because it was good. It was a good reputation. It was good. So whenever you get involved in a collaborative venture, make sure that it serves your distinct mission. Otherwise, it can fall apart. Secondly, enormous mistake. I had a board of trustees. The board of trustees like to make money. They wanted all of our programs to make money so that they could reinvest in the university. Most collaborations do not make money efficiently. They don't. At best, they break even. You make the investment and you hope to break even because you're trying to establish a new system by which you can deliver your instruction, by which you can cooperate with somebody else to deliver better instruction. So, some institutions get very lucky. You know, Yale in Singapore, Yale just entered in Singapore, just signed an agreement to establish Yale in Singapore. Yale is a brand name. They were paid a lot of money to go to Singapore. A lot of money. Yale didn't need the money, but they got more money. And so they're going into Singapore. Those are few and far apart, those kinds of the final piece is understand, boards of trustees need to understand, presidents need to understand, faculty need to understand. There is a reputation which has nothing to do with finances. Why you would enter. If the mission is right, There's a reputational reason you would enter into a cooperative agreement. When Franklin Pierce College became Franklin Pierce University, I told the Board of Trustees, we have got to go global. Because no university, no American university is going to be worth anything if it's not global. And so I entered into agreements in Austria, in Greece, in Ukraine, in France, for the reputation, the halo effect of those institutions collaborating with us. First of all, they were consistent with our mission. But I did that for the reputational value, not for the financial value. And many times that gets confused. The trustees and institutions think they're going to make lots of money by this. That takes a long time to start making. We'll talk about the future. I'll wrap up. There is a fundamental reality that is a mistake made, particularly in bad economic times, because it violates this reality. The way that you have effective institutions, organizations, systems, collaborations, goes vision, program, finances. Not the other way around. Not finances, then we'll design some programs, then we'll decide on the vision. We need to establish a vision. Why are we doing this? What are we doing? Why are we doing this? And then from that, it has to be written so everybody understands it. Then programs. What are the programs that are going to lead us effectively to that vision? And then the finances come. Well, first of all, you say, how much is it going to cost us to do this? And secondly, how much do we anticipate we're going to make? And you know what? In my experience, if you have the right vision and you establish quality programs, the finances come. The finances follow. And with very few exceptions, as a person in higher education, I found that to be true. The issue that we are going to be dealing with, whether it's here in Belgrade, or whether it's in New York City, or whether it's in Athens, or whether it's in Singapore, there are going to be three questions. When I chaired the National Association of Independent Colleges and Universities, which represented all the private schools, all 1,400 private schools in the United States, including Harvard and Stanford and all the rest. There were three fundamental issues we were dealing with. This was 5 years ago, and they exist now and they'll exist in the future. And those are access. Can students get into the programs? Affordability. Can they pay for this? And accountability. Will they be high quality? Will you teach those students what they need to know to get out into the marketplace and to succeed and to be successful? So it's access, can they get in? Affordability. Is it price so that they can actually get in, participate, and graduate in some kind of reasonable time? And the last one is quality. Can you do it in a high quality way that's meaningful? We have paper mills in the United States. I'm sure you probably have some here. The students can go. Students can afford to keep the tuition world, but the quality's low. You don't want them as your accountant. You don't want them running your computers. Because the quality's low. But if you have a system which attends to those three things, access, affordability, and accountability, you've got something special. And any future collaboration has to be based on the same. I think you know where I'm going with the last part of this. The system by 2020, before 2020, today needs to be transformed. And because it's hot in here, I want to leave enough time for questions and answers. Let me go to this last slide. American institutions which have been around for 50, 100, 150 years, particularly private institutions, will in the next 5 years be unable to deliver the quality higher education that they've produced in the past simply because it's costing too much, and the American public cannot pay for it. Within 5 years after that, I believe the same thing is going to happen in Europe. So, what will the answer be? The answer will be for faculties and their administration to get together, to take a look at the best means by which traditional higher education, what I call place-based education, can take place, which will allow for the integration of faculty and students across cultures, and that is supplemented by online e-learning forms of education. For that to happen, we will have to dramatically change the system by which we govern higher education globally. We will have to take a look at, we will have to change the system by which nations regulate and accreditors accredit to allow for us to establish functional systems and functional cooperative programs. And it could be that it wouldn't just be, let's just say Hellenic American University or Franklin Pierce University and this university. It's not going to be just 2 universities. It's going to be 3 or 4 universities tied together, allowing for the interaction for the students to move from campus to campus, and for the institution to maintain its integrity, but also to link that integrity to the integrity of other institutions. Because there are no boundaries anymore in the marketplace of ideas. We've known that for 15 years. There are no boundaries. The internet, Google, it's changed dramatically how knowledge is disseminated, where it's disseminated. You know, the reality is, when I first became president of Franklin Pierce University, the question I was asked over and over again by the editors, how many books do you have in the library? 130,000? That's good. I think you need 150,000. So I go off and spend another 500,000 to get to 150,000. Now the question they ask is, what kind of access do you have to databases around the world? It's not how many physical books do I have in the library. It's how many databases do my students, do my faculty have access to? It's dramatically changed higher education and the cost of higher education. And in reality, it's brought the cost down. But these are measures that have to take place systematically across all of higher education with respect to instruction, instructional resources, library resources, technology. Because the reality is we're becoming too expensive for the average student to access. And while it's being seen in the private sector right now, because of the economies across the world, it will be also in the public sector. When I was in Vietnam, I spoke to a group much like this. And there were 400 students and faculty. And I realized, as I'm giving this now, that my message was very much the same. because I believe in this. I believe that I don't advance, and this is my education, I don't advance unless we all advance together. And it was very clear to me that the indigenous population, they're very far behind us. There was absolutely no way for me not to say that. Development-wise, they're very far behind us. But they are ambitious, and they understand that for them to advance, we have to advance with them. And so, whether it's Vietnam, or Athens, or Belgrade, or Washington, D.C., we're all in this together. Boundaries don't matter. With that, I thank you.